And so I was going to work almost every day at Northwestern, going to the top floor of the garage and, hanging my legs over the top, just staring down and thinking about throwing myself off the building and just killing myself because I thought, I had no friends. I'd never even gone on a date. I had no friends. I'd never even gone on a date. I'd actually done a lot of organizing to that point. I'd actually done a lot of organizing to that point. I had no friends. I'd never even gone on a date. Had nothing in my life, because I, was just so socially awkward and stilted from, at that point, 25 years of a lot of isolation, basically only interacting with animals, not having a lot of human friends. That I just didn't see any hope. I was like, if I can't be a professor, what's the point? And I really came pretty close to killing myself. But the thing that prevented me was I thought, well, if I'm going to go, I should try and do something good for the world. And even at that point, I wasn't a full-fledged animal rights activist then. I'd actually done a lot of organizing to that point. I'd organized in college and law school, but I didn't see myself as an animal rights activist. I just saw myself as someone who was a professor or a graduate student who also did animal rights activism on the side. But I did think that animal rights was the most important thing in the world. And I just honestly just never thought it was my problem. I never thought, or if I did think it was my problem, I didn't think there was a whole lot I could do about it. I thought my role in solving the problem was just writing. That was what I was good at. I was a writer and a researcher. And then when I lost that, I thought, well, I can't do that anymore. So what do I do? And I decided, well, it's time to take direct action. If you don't really care about your life that much or your own well-being, why don't you just go directly into one of these slaughterhouses and try and help on the animals?
I think it would be a little bit intellectually lazy to end this video by just pointing the finger at Wayne and calling him a liar. I think that what's going on here is a little bit more complex, and it's not just the content creators who are involved in a kind of self-deception. It is, much more importantly, members of the audience who are indulging in self-deception here. Of the 3 secret origin stories that Wayne has presented for how he became a diehard vegan activist and how he discovered this secret formula for Direct Action Everywhere's methods of activism, none of them are really plausible, none of them are believable, and the contrast between them is unflattering. It's even more bizarre when you're aware of the extent to which major foundational principles of what DxE was supposed to be were set forward as if they had come to Wayne in a bolt of lightning, as an epiphany, as a great inspiration, and then so easily they were abandoned one after another. The real definition of what this organization was, its raison d'etre, its defining motivations, objectives, methods, organizational hierarchy, shall we say, or lack thereof, those things changed in the wind. And the emphasis on fundraising and what they were fundraising for, that all crept in later. So it's not even so much striking that these are lies or that the stories are inconsistent or that they can't possibly be true. It's very easy for me to imagine that from Wayne's perspective, all 3 of the stories are true, or that the story he's telling now is true. He may feel that the story he's telling now is more true than the stories he told in the past, that this is more honest in coming forward with this evocative image of suicide. Whether Wayne Hsiung was suicidal or not in the past, whether or not he had no friends and had ever been on a date when he'd already been organizing vegan activist events for several years, or how true any of this is, or how consistently and accurately he's reporting the timeline, or to what extent he might just be being wistful rather than being dishonest. Some of us middle-aged people get wistful, I think the really profound corrupting influence here is fundraising itself. And ironically, Direct Action Everywhere was founded with an acute awareness of how corrupting fundraising could be. They began with bold declarations on their website. I remember seeing them in text rather than in video or in audio interviews, where they were declaring that unlike PETA, unlike these other organizations, they were not going to be doing fundraising. They'd accept donations for some kind of limited purpose, but that really they were going to be this social network that spent their time recruiting people, that they wanted you and they wanted your time and they didn't want your money and they weren't going to do fundraising. And they were aware that fundraising had kind of devoured other movements and organizations and in some ways corrupted them in the vegan movement. Now, I've been speaking to a lot of insiders from Direct Action Network, present insiders and past insiders who left lately. And one of them gave me a kind of nothing anecdote, an anecdote that to you guys in the audience wouldn't seem shocking. But to me, it was really evocative. It was really stirring because it's such a contrast to my own life and my life with my girlfriend, Melissa, and the things I would never do and never think of doing in vegan activism. And it was just an anecdote that described that Wayne and Priya, so their boyfriend and girlfriend, Wayne and his girlfriend Priya, that they'd struggled for some years or at least some months to have Priya really give kind of leading lectures, for her to be kind of the main face, the person in front at the podium when they did events. But they struggled with the fact that when Priya was the main speaker or the only speaker, they'd get less than $500 in donations. They'd get much less money. And when Wayne was on the microphone, when Wayne was doing the main speech, or when he was wrapping it up with these very passionate, emotive appeals to the audience, they'd be getting more than $1,000 in donations. Now, I mean, that's very striking and very stirring to me for many different reasons. But one of them is, the first thought in my mind was, I have never done that. I never would do that. And this is real church basement style fundraising, where they were giving this rousing speech. And again, Wayne was better at giving the speeches than Priya. And then literally, passing around a hat for people to put donations. They're passing around a bowl or a box, whatever it is. But people would just be giving cash donations. Maybe they'd also accept checks. I shouldn't say that. But whatever. They were accepting donations on the spot, spontaneously given in response to this emotional appeal to the audience. I would absolutely never do that. I regard that as like an aspect of 19th century politics that was barely acceptable in the 20th century, and that I'm really proud that we can leave behind in the 21st century. I have done fundraising, you guys know, for a court case once where I needed money to be donated for legal fees for a specific project. If I'm going to illustrate a children's storybook or make a children's cartoon, as vegan, to promote veganism through fiction, I can imagine people donating money for that. But then that's for a specific project. You're going to see where the money goes. You're going to get accounting of how the money is spent. And also you're going to get something back from it. Okay, you donated $100 to publish this book, but, we're going to send you a copy of the book, in the mail, and maybe a stuffed animal or a t-shirt or something that goes with the storybook. That model of crowdfunding, of donations that are transparent and accountable and project specific, that I'm totally at peace with. But the church basement style of fundraising, I'm profoundly uncomfortable with. And this issue of Wayne slipping away step by step from his own truth, or maybe getting more and more comfortable with, broadcasting his emotional desperation, which wasn't there in version 1 of the story. It wasn't there in version 2 of the story, right? In version 1 of the story, this was really kind of a cold, rational decision. Apparently, like many people, I've met many, many people who were extremely disappointed with law school, extremely disappointed with the practice of the law, whether they were in corporate law or human rights law, that this was an unbelievably boring, bureaucratic job they didn't want to do. And then one way or another, we're looking for a way to get out of law school or get out of legal practice and go into humanitarian work. Believe me, some of those people go to Cambodia, where I met them. But even within Canada, there are a lot of disillusioned lawyers looking for something meaningful to do with their lives, where the original narrative was he was one of these disillusioned lawyers wanting to make the world a better place, and he made a kind of rational, calculated decision that the way to do it was going to be through veganism and animal rights. Version 2 of the story, which was tied to this message about quote-unquote social science research, that's a powerful story in its own way, that he was giving out pamphlets, and one day decided, look, the pamphlets just don't work. He's got to take on a new direction. That narrative, the problem with it now is they've really abandoned that approach to vegan activism. There is another group, there's a splinter group that broke off from DxE that is called something like the Sentience Foundation. The Sentience Institute, I think. And that's one famous or notorious former member of DxE, left DxE. And if you read the definition of what they're doing, in many ways, they're like returning to those promises from Direct Action Everywhere around the year 2015, where they're saying, hey, wait, this was supposed to be about social science research. This was supposed to be about some kind of carefully constructed mythology linked to the history of slavery, history of feminism, how women got the right to vote, doing social science research about what's effective and what's not, whether historically or presently about, forms of activism, where they really went back to that. So the problem with Wayne's second version of the founding myth, of his inspiration of becoming an activist and the lightning bolt that created direct action everywhere, is that it no longer relates to what direct action everywhere is all about. Today, what direct action everywhere is all about are these quote-unquote animal rescue operations, like cattle rustling, going and stealing animals from slaughterhouses and factory farms and creating lurid spectacles on the internet out of that, and trying to get newspaper headlines out of that, and getting themselves arrested, and then trying to make newspaper headlines and get notoriety and fame out of being arrested and going to prison, or at least going to court. That's the core of their current methodology. Not based on social science research, but hey. And then beyond that, they do a lot of stunts that were similar to what PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, did in the early 1990s. Again, all about headlines, notoriety stuff. So now there's this need for a new mythology, for a new story. And the focus of the new story is about direct action everywhere's current lionization of self-sacrifice, of going to prison, of getting arrested, of self-destructive, desperate forms of activism and advocacy. Right? That's the emphasis now. And so Wayne now portrays himself as someone who is suicidal, but therefore willing to break the law, willing to break into slaughterhouses or break into farms and steal things and go to prison. He's trying to put himself on the ragged edge of hopelessness, poverty, suicide. The narrative is shifting, and he himself may not be intentionally lying. He may not be aware of the inconsistencies in his story. And above all else, he may not be aware of the extent to which handing around the donation cup, handing around the hat for people to put money in, again and again and again, not 10 times, not 20 times, hundreds of times, he and his girlfriend Priya have stood in front of a crowd and tried to say something emotionally evocative and, moving in this way to get them to put money in that hat. And that will have a profoundly corrupting influence on them again and again as they try to tell a story in a way that connects to the audience, as they try to say what that audience wants to hear. As just like an old-fashioned Christian preacher, they may start by thinking they're teaching the one true doctrine. But what they end up teaching is whatever the audience wants to hear, because what they desperately need is that affirmation of a positive response from the audience, and ultimately for the audience to open up their wallets and hand over their money with absolutely no clear expectations or promises on the other side about where that money is going to go, how it's going to be spent, what the outcomes being returned to that audience are supposed to be.
I mean, really, people like to disrespect my crew, but the fact is that you know my name and I don't know you.